The name shows up on name tags, on coffee mugs sold in gift shops as a joke, on school rosters from 4 different decades, attached to little girls who grew up to be nurses, teachers, chemists, mothers. It is not a name anyone connects to catastrophe. It sounds like the woman who works the front desk, or the aunt who sends birthday cards late but always sends them. And yet, across 5 decades and 3 continents, 5 women who shared this ordinary name were pulled into circumstances no one around them could have predicted. A whistleblower who never made it to a meeting, an influencer whose last video was of her washing a motorcycle, a wife who vanished on a holiday weekend and never came home, a scientist who followed every safety rule written at the time and died anyway, and a surgeon who gave up a London career to treat villagers in one of the most remote places on Earth and was killed on the road home. These are not punchlines. They are real people, real deaths, and in more than one case, families who are still asking questions nobody has fully answered, even decades later. Here are 5 of the worst Karen deaths ever recorded in history. It is November 1974 at the Kerr-McGee plutonium fuel plant near Cimarron, Oklahoma. Karen Silkwood is 28 years old, a laboratory analyst by trade and a union activist by conviction. And for months now, she has been growing uneasy about what she is watching happen on the factory floor. The plant manufactures plutonium fuel rods for nuclear reactors, work that carries risk by design. Earlier that year, in August 1974, Silkwood had been elected to the 3-person bargaining committee of her local union, the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers, the first woman ever to hold that position at the plant. It put her in a position to notice things, and to be believed when she raised them. That fall, Kerr-McGee had pushed production into overdrive, adding longer shifts to catch up on a backlog. Spills increased. So did contaminated workers. Silkwood took her concerns as far as Washington, testifying to the Federal Atomic Energy Commission about conditions on the floor. She came to believe something worse was happening too, that quality control records on the fuel rods themselves were being falsified to keep output moving. Through October and into November, she starts quietly gathering proof. Then the danger stops being something she is documenting and becomes something happening directly to her. On November 5th, plant monitors detect plutonium on her hands and arms, a self-check that registered hundreds of times the legal limit. She goes through decontamination. The next day, she comes in strictly for paperwork. No contact with radioactive material at all, and she is contaminated again. By November 7th, it is worse still. Plutonium turns up inside her body. A response team is sent to her apartment and finds contamination spread through the bathroom, the kitchen, even inside her refrigerator, where it is found on a package of food. Almost everything she owns has to be destroyed. Kerr-McGee suggests she contaminated herself, perhaps to embarrass the company. Silkwood and her supporters believe the plant's own conditions, or something more deliberate, are responsible. Investigators later note a detail that never sat easily with the company's version. The type of plutonium recovered from her body and her home didn't match anything she would have had normal access to on her shift. It matched a batch stored elsewhere at the plant, material she should never have been able to touch. By November 13th, Silkwood tells people close to her that she has put together a file, a folder of documents she believes proves the safety records were faked. That night, she attends a union meeting at a cafe in Crescent. Witnesses see her there with a binder of papers under her arm. Afterward, she leaves alone, driving toward Oklahoma City, where a New York Times reporter and a union official are waiting at a hotel to look at what she has gathered. She never arrives. Her car is found off the highway, having struck a concrete culvert wall. Police conclude she fell asleep at the wheel. There is no folder in the wreckage. It is never found, not then, not since. A private investigator hired by the union examined the car afterward and described damage to the rear bumper he believed was consistent with being struck from behind. Evidence, he argued, that something had forced her off the road. The official finding never changed. Accidental death, a single car, a woman alone on a dark stretch of Oklahoma highway. What didn't end was the argument over what happened to her. The Silkwood estate sued Kerr-McGee, alleging negligence tied to the plutonium contamination. In 1979, a federal jury awarded $10 million in punitive damages, a verdict that helped define plutonium under the law as an ultra-hazardous material. Kerr-McGee appealed. The case reached the Supreme Court, which ruled in 1984 that state courts could hold nuclear companies liable under their own tort laws, regardless of federal safety regulation. By 1986, it ended the way so many of these cases do, an out-of-court settlement, $1.38 million, with Kerr-McGee admitting no wrongdoing. By then, Silkwood's story had already outgrown the courtroom. In 1983, a film starring Meryl Streep brought her name to audiences who had never heard of Crescent or Cimarron, Oklahoma. And decades later, on the 50th anniversary of her death, a new documentary reopened the case again, built around recordings and interviews nobody had heard before. Half a century on, and people are still looking for that folder. Silkwood's death played out in courtrooms and newspapers, argued over for years by lawyers and journalists who never met her. The next case unfolds differently. A death that happened in front of an audience that was, in a sense, already watching, even though not one of them saw it happen. It is late November of 2025, on the roads outside Florida Blanca, Colombia. Karen Sofia Quiroz Ramirez is 25 years old, and to nearly 90,000 people across Instagram and TikTok, she is known simply as Biker Girl. Her online life is built around one thing, her motorcycle. Videos of rides through the Colombian countryside, photos posted from gas stations and mountain overlooks, a comment section full of regulars, the kind of followers who show up post after post, cheering her on like they know her personally. Riding isn't a hobby she happens to film. It's the whole account. It's who she is to strangers scrolling past. On the day she dies, she posts one more video. It shows her washing the motorcycle. Nothing unusual about the scene at all. The bike gleaming, her going about an ordinary afternoon. Hours later, she's gone. That night, Ramirez is riding toward Florida Blanca when she tries to move her bike between a car and a tractor-trailer, the kind of pass experienced riders make without thinking twice. She clips a small car, loses control, and falls. The truck can't stop in time. A transit official tells reporters the likely explanation is exactly what it looks like. A rider caught between two vehicles, misjudging the gap, with an investigation open to determine if either driver bears responsibility. What makes this case linger isn't only the crash, it's what she posted before it. Entertainment outlets picked up the story afterward, framing a comment she'd made online as a haunting prediction, something that read differently once she was gone. What's actually confirmed is narrower than that framing suggests. Hours before the crash, she wrote that she hoped she wouldn't wreck because she was riding without her glasses. That's the documented line. Whether it counts as a premonition or just a writer stating a plain risk out loud, the record doesn't settle. It's worth being honest about that gap between what she actually wrote and what got made of it afterward. Days later, her funeral is held. Her comment sections, the same ones that used to fill with tire recommendations and ride envy, fill instead with the kind of messages you'd expect. Strangers who felt like they knew her, grieving a person they'd never met in person. There's something particular about a death that happens in front of an audience that was already watching, even though none of them saw it happen live. Ramirez built a following on the exact thing that killed her. A life spent moving through traffic on two wheels, filmed and shared, and loved by tens of thousands of people who never touched the handlebars themselves. The crash that ended it became a headline for the same reason the videos did. People were already paying attention. That's one kind of tragedy, the public kind, played out for a crowd that had been watching for months. The next case is nothing like it. A woman simply stopped showing up one night, and a small town spent more than a decade trying to find out why. It is October 29th, 2011, in Dyersburg, Tennessee, a Saturday, the weekend before Halloween. Porches around town are already decorated. Kids are counting down the days until they can put on costumes and go door to door. Karen Swift is 44 years old, a mother of 4, and she spends that day the way a lot of people in a small town spend the last weekend of October, with no sign that it will be her last. That night she disappears. The next morning, her car is found abandoned on a rural roadside. Not long after, 2 of her cell phones turn up near a neighbor's house, both of them smashed. There's no dramatic buildup in the record, no witnesses describing a struggle, no 911 call capturing her final moments. She's simply there and then she isn't. For 6 weeks, Dyersburg searches. Then, in mid-December, a cemetery caretaker finds her body hidden beneath a tangle of vines near Bledsoe Cemetery in rural Dyer County. An autopsy determines she died of blunt force trauma to the head. Whatever happened to Karen Swift on that Halloween weekend, it was not an accident. Suspicion settles early on her estranged husband, David Swift. The couple had separated, but suspicion is not evidence, and for more than a decade the case stays open, unsolved, a small-town disappearance that families in Dyer County never stop talking about. Karen's daughter, Ashley Swift, grows up with the question hanging over everything, later describing the years of not knowing why and why the answer never came. Then, in August of 2022, almost 11 years after Karen vanished, David Swift is arrested and charged with her murder. The case draws national attention. NBC's Dateline covers it. ABC produces its own account of the disappearance, the search, and the trial. What had been a local tragedy becomes a case strangers across the country follow by name. The trial itself, in June of 2024, does not deliver the ending the years of build-up seemed to promise. District Attorney Danny Goodman's office puts the case to a jury. On June 6, 2024, that jury acquits David Swift of first-degree premeditated murder and of second-degree murder. On the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, they cannot agree at all. The judge declares a mistrial on that count. For a while, it looks like David Swift might be tried again on the manslaughter charge. That door closes too. In March of 2025, the remaining charge is dismissed, the court agreeing with the defense that the statute of limitations had run out. No one is ever convicted of killing Karen Swift. There's something almost unbearable about the timing. Dyersburg that weekend would have looked like any other American town in late October. Plastic skeletons on lawns, pumpkins on porches, kids rehearsing which house to hit first. Halloween runs on pretend fear, the kind you can switch off once the porch light goes dark. For one family, that pretend fear got replaced by something real sometime on the night of October 29th, and more than a decade of investigation, an arrest, and a full trial still ended without a name attached to the crime. Karen Swift's case sits in an unusual place among these 5. It played out in real time, in an American courtroom, argued over by lawyers and reported by national news crews. And still, when the last gavel came down, the town was left more or less where it started, certain that Karen had been murdered and unable to prove who did it. There's a different kind of case waiting on the other end of that spectrum, one where nothing is disputed, where science understands exactly what happened and why, down to the second. It is August 1996. At Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. Karen Wetterhahn is 48 years old, a chemistry professor and one of the country's leading experts on how heavy metals damage the human body. Her days are mostly filled with administrative work by then, meetings, budgets, committee assignments, but this particular task, she decides, is one she'll handle herself. She's preparing a standard for an NMR experiment. Work tied to her research into how mercury interacts with the proteins that repair damaged DNA. The compound she needs is dimethylmercury, a substance so dangerous that few labs in the country still keep it on a shelf. Wetterhahn knows this. She's read the safety sheets. On the 14th of August, she sets up inside a fume hood and puts on the protective equipment recommended at the time: a lab coat, goggles, and a pair of standard latex gloves. While transferring the liquid with a pipette, a few drops slip loose and land on the back of her gloved hand. It's a small amount, well under half a teaspoon. She feels no burning, no sting, no sensation at all. She finishes the transfer, cleans the area, peels off her gloves, and washes her hands like she's done 1,000 times before. By every standard she's been trained to trust, she's done nothing wrong. What she doesn't know, what almost nobody in her field knows yet, is that dimethylmercury doesn't behave like other hazardous liquids on latex. It passes straight through the glove in seconds, absorbed into the skin as if the barrier weren't there at all. No protocol warns her of this, because at that point, the danger hasn't been documented anywhere. She goes back to her research. Months pass without a single symptom. Then, in January of 1997, roughly 5 months after the spill, she starts losing her balance. Her speech begins to slur. Weight drops off her without explanation. A friend finally convinces her to see a doctor, and when the results come back, her blood shows mercury levels dozens of times past what toxicologists consider a lethal dose. By then, the compound has already reached her brain. Doctors start her on chelation therapy, a treatment meant to help her body flush the toxin out. But dimethylmercury doesn't behave like the mercury compounds the treatment was built for. It resists removal almost entirely. Her coordination keeps failing. Within weeks of that first stumble, she slips into what doctors described as a vegetative state, still able, in brief flashes, to register the people near her, though unable to answer them. Before she loses the ability to communicate for good, she asks her colleagues from her hospital bed for 2 things: test everyone in her lab for exposure, and warn the wider chemistry community what she now understands about latex gloves and this particular compound. She dies on June 8, 1997. She's 48 years old. Afterward, an independent lab tests the gloves recovered from her workspace and confirms exactly what her case had already proven the hard way. Dimethylmercury penetrates ordinary latex in under 20 seconds. Federal workplace safety regulators issue a hazard bulletin built directly around what happened to her, spelling out the precautions labs needed to take with the compound and recommending laminate gloves as the only reliable barrier against it. Labs across the country start abandoning dimethylmercury altogether, switching to safer standards for the same kind of testing. Wetterhahn had spent her career studying how toxic metals damage the body and had helped build Dartmouth's research program on exactly that question. In the end, the last thing she taught her field, she taught by dying of it. There's no dispute anywhere in this case, no missing folder, no bumper marks to argue over. Investigators tested her family. They tested her lab. The only trace of contamination they ever found was inside the fume hood where she'd worked that August afternoon. Where Silkwood's death left behind 5 decades of unanswered questions, Wetterhahn's left behind a settled fact. The gloves failed, and the science that proved it came only after she was already gone. There's one more name on this list. Like Karen Swift, this last Karen died at someone else's hands. But where Swift vanished from a quiet Tennessee town, this Karen was killed thousands of miles from home, in a place most people watching will never see, doing the last thing anyone would expect to get a person killed. It is August of 2010 in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan in a remote district called Kuran wa Munjan in Badakhshan province. Karen Wu is 36 years old, a general surgeon from Stevenage in England, the daughter of a Chinese father and an English mother. A year or so earlier, she had a comfortable career in London, work tied to a private healthcare company, the kind of life a British surgeon is supposed to want. She gave it up to come here. Wu had joined a medical team run by the International Assistance Mission, a charity that ran eye camps in some of the poorest and most isolated corners of Afghanistan. She had come to the country to do exactly this, and she documented the work as she went, writing about it and filming it, determined that people back home should see what medical care looked like for villagers who had none. The team's job on this trip was simple and enormous at once: travel into the Nuristan region, a place with almost no doctors and one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, and treat whoever they could reach. Wu's focus was maternal and infant care, pregnant women and newborns in villages that had never seen a surgeon. To get there, the team traveled the hard way, crossing high mountain passes on foot and by pack animal, carrying their supplies into the Parun Valley. They held their clinics for the villagers, treated the people who came, and then began the long journey back toward Kabul. Wu was 36, engaged to be married, with the wedding only weeks away. On or around August 5th, the team stopped after fording a river, in the forest of Kuran wa Munjan. That is where the gunmen found them. There was no negotiation. According to the accounts that followed, the attackers took the aid workers into the trees, stood them in a line, and shot them one by one. 10 members of the team were killed, 6 Americans, 2 Afghans, 1 German, and Karen Wu, the only Briton among them. It was the deadliest single attack on foreign aid workers of the entire Afghanistan war. In the days after, both the Taliban and the militant group Hizb-i-Islami claimed responsibility, accusing the doctors of spying and of trying to convert Muslims to Christianity. Wu's family rejected the accusation flatly. She was a humanist, they said, with no religious or political agenda, a doctor who had gone to Afghanistan for one reason: to help people who had almost no one else. Local Taliban commanders in the region later disowned the killings themselves, saying they had confirmed the dead were genuine aid workers, condemning the murders and offering condolences to the families. What Wu left behind was not a mystery. There was no missing folder, no disputed autopsy, no argument over what happened. What she left behind was a body of work and a wedding that never came. She had helped build an effort meant to keep bringing medical care into the country, and her family and colleagues carried it forward after her. Of all 5 women on this list, Karen Wu is the one who most clearly saw the danger coming and walked straight into it anyway, because she had decided the people on the other side of those mountains were worth the risk. Karen Wu knew the road home was dangerous. She made the trip anyway, and it cost her everything, weeks before her wedding. That is where these 5 stories quietly converge, across 50 years and 3 continents. Not in the name they shared, common enough to be a punchline, but in how little warning any of them had. A whistleblower who never reached her meeting, a writer who posted one last ordinary video, a mother who simply didn't come home one Halloween weekend, a chemist who followed every rule and died anyway, a surgeon who walked into the mountains to help strangers and never walked out. 5 women named Karen, and in more than one case, families still waiting on an answer that may never arrive.